Good evening, everyone. Excellent. So my name is Professor Tara Dean, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm the Provost at London South Bank University. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all, and I know we have a number of external guests with us today, and family members and friends, to South Bank University, to the inaugural lecture of Professor Lynne Dawkins. So the presentation of inaugural lecture is a significant milestone in the academic career of a full professor. The inaugural lecture provides an opportunity to present their career and research so far, introduce their field of expertise, and to update colleagues on their current and future plans. For the schools where our professors are based at, the event is a chance to celebrate their achievement across the staff and student community, to strengthen existing relations and catch up with some alumni, hopefully. And I noticed from the list of attendees, we have some alumni, and particular welcome to you back to LSBU, and also to establish new conversation and collaborations. For the university, inaugural lecture represents an essential component of its public events. It is a key opportunity to engage with general public, external guests, and make them aware of the wider benefit of the university's teaching and research. So as such, we are really delighted to be restarting this series again after the COVID in person. Of course, meeting in persons feel very special. It facilitates a kind of greater richness of understanding, greater flexibility of discussion in the post-event reception, and I hope you stay and have a glass of something with Lynne and her colleagues afterwards. And it's really a special milestone being able to do this in person. But of course, meeting in person also allows us to rehearse the age-old introduction to any face-to-face event that many of you have probably missed in the past 2 years. So here it goes, bear with me. Switch off your mobile phones, please. Keep in mind that we are recording the lecture. The toilets are signposted outside, and if the alarm goes, we are not having a fire test, so please make your way in an orderly fashion to the signposted exit. So I imagine that you're all very delighted to hear that again. So allow me to introduce Professor Dawkins. Lynne obtained her bachelor degree in applied psychology in mid-90s from UCLan, University of Central Lancashire, and went on to do her PhD in psychology at Goldsmith, and she completed that in 2001. I read your CV. Excellent. She is really a career academic. She has worked at Kingston, Goldsmith, and University of East London before joining us at LSBU in 2016, initially as an associate professor, and then being promoted to professor in 2019. Normally, she would have had her inaugural lecture delivered within a year of being promoted, but we were not really living under normal conditions, so we had to wait a bit for this inaugural lecture. Lynne's area of expertise is addiction, particularly nicotine and smoking cessation, for which she is a world-leading authority. She has been one of the first scientists to map trajectories of recovery and/or maintenance and predictive utility of cessation. This work has had input into the Department of Health consultation on the future of tobacco control, which fed directly into the UK tobacco control policy. She has also been one of the first researchers worldwide to have conducted research on different aspects of e-cigarettes. Her work in this area has helped to inform national policy through the UK governmental agency, MHRA, and the House of Commons Science and Technology Committee. By every measure and by every performance indicator, Lynne is a stellar academic researcher. And I, for one, am very pleased that she has made LSBU her academic home. But of course, there is more to Lynne than her academic accolades and the impact of her research. And who better to share those nuggets of information about Lynne as a person than her colleagues? So I reached out to them. And what I am about to share is what they shared with me. That she is a world-leading authority on nicotine and tobacco by day, who can then take off her shoes and run through a fountain after a conference. She can present a conference keynote and then sit down on the cobblestones and watch the fire eaters and jugglers. She's also a fitness fanatic. Many of her colleagues spoke about being invited, in bracket, dragged, to the LSBU gym to join her for high-intensity interval training classes at lunchtime. Lynne is also rumored to enjoy a bit of karaoke. And in the run-up to one Christmas party, enticed colleagues to join in with a rousing chorus of Rock Lobster. I had to look that up. Oh, nothing I'm familiar with, I'm afraid. They also said Lynne has a very youthful outlook and sometimes the sense of humor of a 12-year-old boy. I wasn't quite sure what to make of that. But by all accounts, she sounds as a really fun person to have in this school and a really good colleague. But actually what they all also said, that she is a colleague who is extremely generous with her time and a fantastic mentor. And that is really a legacy that we should all aspire to have as academics. So please join me in welcoming Prof. Dawkins to deliver her inaugural lecture.
Thank you, Tara. I wasn't expecting all of that. Interesting. It's great to be here. It's really lovely to see so many nice faces in the audience. Thanks everyone for coming. Right, I've now got the job of trying to summarize about 25 years of research into less than an hour. So see how we get on. And I do slip into saying we instead of I realized that as I was kind of practicing this. And that's okay, because as an academic, it's not just me doing the work. I've always been working as part of a team. So although I've led on most of this work that I'm presenting it, it's we, not just me. Okay, let's start at the beginning. I've forgotten already which way it goes. Why did I study psychology? I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. I was 16 and all I knew was I had to leave school. I wanted to go to college, and the only way I could get a free bus pass to go to college was if I chose a subject that they didn't offer at school. So psychology it was. And I didn't regret it. I really enjoyed psychology. I continued with psychology for my degree. And then at the end of my degree, I still wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, but I knew that I really did like research. So my project supervisor at the time said, well, why not do a PhD? I didn't even know what a PhD was, I don't think, at the time. But I knew that I liked research, and so I looked at possible PhD supervisors. I discovered Professor Jane Powell at Goldsmiths, approached her. She was quite willing for me to come and join her and do a PhD with her. So that's a photograph of me in my office in around 1997, I think that was. And I don't know if you can see the detail in that picture, but we could smoke in our office in those days. There's my packet of Golden Virginia next to the half-eaten sandwich and the Golden Wonder crisps. And yeah, I was a smoker. So why smoking? I'd tried to give up so many times, found it really, really difficult. So that became the focus of my PhD. So the main question that I was seeking to answer then was, why is it so hard to stop smoking? And it's a question I'm still trying to answer. And of course, there's not just one single reason. There's lots of reasons. Social, cultural, contextual, biological, neurological, and so on and so forth. But for me, for my PhD, I was mostly interested in looking at behavioral factors, cognitive factors, and emotional factors. And this stemmed from current neurobiological theories of addiction that were prominent at the time. And these particular theories proposed that the underlying brain pathways that are involved in A, responding to rewards, and B, that are involved in cognitive control, particularly our ability to kind of exercise restraint over our behavior and activities, become impaired after repeated drug use. So I was interested in exploring this in smokers, and we also theorized that if these kind of impairments, for want of a better word, are apparent, that they should be revealed particularly when smokers haven't smoked for a period of time. So we set about testing that theory. So in one of the first studies that I did for my PhD, we recruited 26 smokers, and they came to the lab twice, once after recent smoking, so they just had a cigarette, and then once after they hadn't smoked for around 10 to 12 hours, so they'd abstained from smoking overnight. And we also tested 30 non-smokers at the same time points for like a comparison group. And we gave them a number of tasks that kind of map onto these ideas about reward and response inhibition. So we used a card sorting task. We call this the carrot. Some of you will remember this one. Very simple card sorting task where participants just have to sort cards according to whether they've got a 1 or a 2 or a 3 on them. But on some trials, we gave them some money to sort faster. And we can then look at their responsiveness to reward by seeing if they increase their speed of card sorting when they're given the money compared to the trials where they're not. So that was a measure of responsiveness to reward. And we also asked them, we gave them a questionnaire that asked about their enjoyment of just everyday events and activities, like would you enjoy your favorite TV show, eating your favorite food, hanging out with friends, and so on. And that was a self-report scale to look at their perceptions of pleasure. And then finally, to test kind of impulse control, we used an eye-tracking task where participants would look at a center fixation point and a dot would appear either to the right or to the left, and they were instructed not to look at that dot, but instead to look in the other direction. So it's a measure of somebody's ability to kind of inhibit that kind of automatic tendency to look at a dot and then to look in the other direction. And we can look at the percentage accuracy on that. So if they're accurate, it means they're not looking at the dot and they're looking in the other direction. Okay, so what did we find? So we've got a few graphs to show you now, so I'll talk you through these. So first of all, on the card sorting task, so this is how responsive smokers were to reward when they'd smoked and not smoked. So on the vertical axis here, this is the increase in speed of card sorting on the trials where they're given money compared to no money. So anything above 0 means they increase their speed of card sorting with the reward. And if it's below 0, they decrease their speed of card sorting. And as I said, we tested them on 2 occasions. So we had some non-smokers in red here, who didn't smoke, obviously. And then we had, in orange, a group of people that abstained from smoking at the first time point, and then they smoked at the second time point. And then in yellow, these people smoked at the first time point, and then they abstained at the second time point. So you can see there from that graph that our smokers that had not smoked were much less responsive to reward, i.e. being given money on this card sorting task. So that's the orange one here and the yellow one here, compared to smokers who had just smoked. So yellow here and orange there. And on the self-reported pleasure scale, again, we found similar findings. So the y-axis here is actually, it's a measure of anhedonia. So that means that a higher score actually means less self-reported enjoyment of everyday events and activities. So again, the red is the non-smokers. The orange is the people that abstained at time 1 and smoked at time 2. And the yellow is the people that smoked at time 1 and abstained at time 2. So again, you can see when smokers hadn't smoked for 10 to 12 hours, they reported finding things less enjoyable compared to smokers that had recently smoked and compared to non-smokers. And in terms of the inhibitory control task, so the ability to not look at that dot in the periphery and to look in the other direction, this is what we found for that one. So again, same colours here. We've got the percentage correct, whoops, wrong button. Percentage correct on the y-axis. Non-smokers are in red. And we can see that when smokers had abstained in orange here, they're doing less well compared to smokers. And smokers that have recently smoked are doing even better. At time 2, the scores are kind of converging a bit. People are getting better the second time that they've done it. But we're still seeing that difference between smokers that have abstained and smokers that have recently smoked. So to summarize all that, it seems that when smokers haven't smoked for 10 to 12 hours, they're less responsive to reward, find things less pleasurable, and have greater difficulty inhibiting automatic kind of responses. But you might be thinking, well, that's all very well, but these are all like really boring lab-based tasks. What happens maybe in more real-world kind of situations? So we decided to do something a little bit different and make it a bit more kind of real-world. So this was an idea that I had for bringing people in and showing them a whole load of different film clips. So again, we tested smokers who had just smoked, who had not smoked for 10 to 12 hours, and we tested non-smokers. And we showed them a whole load of different types of film clips. Some of them were quite sad, some of them were really pretty boring, and some of them were quite happy and silly and uplifting, like this silly clip from When Harry Met Sally. And they rated a number of emotions after they'd viewed all of these clips. And we found that smokers that hadn't smoked for 10 to 12 hours reported less happiness after viewing these pleasurable, positive types of film clips compared to smokers who had just smoked and compared to non-smokers. So it helps to kind of build the evidence base there. So I'm now moving on to my post kind of PhD days, and I stayed on at Goldsmiths to do my postdoc with Professor Jane Powell, and we continued with this kind of line of work. And one of the first things we looked at is, well, we've shown these differences between smokers that have recently smoked and smokers that have abstained, but are those effects due to smoking, or is it actually due to nicotine, the active ingredients in tobacco smoke? So we collected data from a much bigger sample of smokers. We had 145 smokers, and again, they came to the lab on 2 occasions, but this time we asked them all not to smoke for 10 to 12 hours. And on one occasion, we gave them a nicotine lozenge, and on the other occasion, they got a placebo lozenge, and they didn't know which were which, we didn't know which was which. So essentially, when they'd had the placebo lozenge, that was like the abstinent condition. And when they'd had the nicotine lozenge, that had replaced some of the nicotine from smoking. And we tested them on a whole range of tests, some of the ones that I've just described, and some other cognitive tasks, some different measures of inhibitory control, and some different measures of reward. And we replicated the previous findings with using nicotine and not just with smoking. So coming back to this question, well, why is it so hard to stop smoking? And as I said, there are lots of other known factors. We know strong cravings, withdrawal symptoms, cues, other types of stressful situations. But in addition to that, this body of work kind of added to the literature by suggesting that it might also be because when smokers try to stop, they may find things less motivating or less enjoyable. Or on the other hand, perhaps nicotine might make other activities more rewarding. And I'm working with Nikki Rycroft and some others in this audience to continue to look at that. And then secondly, it might be hard to stop smoking because smokers might be using nicotine to help increase their ability to control their impulsive urges. And abstinence then might reveal those difficulties with impulse control. So the next question then becomes, well, if when smokers are abstinent, they're less responsive to rewards, don't find things as enjoyable, find it a bit harder to control impulses, what effect might this have then when smokers try to quit? So the next thing we did was to look at whether some of these changes that we'd noticed during early abstinence actually get better as somebody tries to quit over a number of months. So using that same sample of 145 smokers who'd had the nicotine and the placebo lozenges, we then followed them up over a 3-month period as they attempted to quit smoking. And 33 of them managed to quit smoking, not a huge number, and that just reflects how difficult it is to try and stop smoking. But we got everybody back at 7 days, 1 month, and 3 months, and we tested them on the same tasks to see if any of these kind of changes improved. And we could then compare those to the people that had continued to smoke. And we found responsiveness to reward did get better. It got better quite quickly, actually. By 1 month, they were showing kind of normal responsiveness to reward. And so did their self-reported enjoyment of everyday events and activities. But we did not see any improvement in inhibitory control. And this was using a couple of different tasks that even after 3 months, smokers who had managed to quit were still showing they were less good at controlling their kind of impulsive urges, measured using that eye movement task and a couple of others. The other question is, okay, if this is the case, can we predict who is going to be successful at quitting and who is going to relapse based on some of these early observations about inhibitory control, responsiveness to reward, and so on? So using the same set of data, we looked at a whole range of factors, some genetic factors, some personality factors as well, at what could actually predict who would relapse. Response to reward and self-reported pleasure during those early hours of abstinence didn't predict relapse, nor did craving or withdrawal symptoms, and they were measured during those early hours of abstinence. But we did see that poor inhibitory control did predict relapse, and so did nicotine dependence, but we already knew that nicotine dependence could predict success with a quit attempt. Then the next question becomes, well, okay, so if poor inhibitory control doesn't really recover and it can predict who's going to relapse, what can we do about it? So this was now when I was at UEL, and this was some work that I did with Emma Chapman, my doctoral student at the time. And we wanted to see, could we do anything to improve inhibitory control? And then if we can, does that help people to stay off cigarettes? And just a little departure,
I know some of you might be thinking, well, Roy Baumeister might be saying, no, ego depletion, that's not going to work. But there is another theory by Tuck that said, well, if you can train people to be kind of more cautious and to be more restrained, that actually spills over into other areas. So there is a kind of competing theory there. We were also aware that Matt Field and Andrew Jones had done something very similar with social drinkers. So they had actually trained social drinkers on an inhibitory control task to be a bit more cautious. And they then sent them to the bar and they said, have as much beer as you want. And the people that had been trained to be more cautious on the inhibitory control task actually drank less beer than the people that hadn't been trained to be more cautious. So we thought, well, if Matt Field can do it with social drinkers, we'll give it a try, see what happens with smokers. So we used the same task, we used this stop signal task, and it looks a bit like this. So participants are sat in front of a keyboard and they see an X or an O flash up on the screen, and they just have to touch the X or the O and press the corresponding key on the keyboard, unless they hear a beep. And that beep can be, there can be quite a delay, or it can be quite close to when the letters flash up. It's quite a difficult task. So if you can inhibit that response to press the key, then you've successfully overridden that kind of automatic tendency. So when I say we trained people on this task, we didn't really train them, we just kind of varied the instructions. So we said to people, it's really important that you be as cautious as possible on this task, and really make sure that you focus on not pressing the key when you hear the beep, compared to people that didn't get those instructions. So that was the kind of the training. And then we gave them a couple of other tasks. One, another computerised task, which measured their preferences for cigarettes versus another reward, chocolate. And we also asked them to text the researcher when they smoked their next cigarette, and they recorded the number of cigarettes they smoked in the next 24 hours. So if our training was successful, we would expect to see reduced preference for cigarettes, longer to the next cigarette, and fewer cigarettes smoked within the next 24 hours. So did it work? Yes, we did manage to improve inhibitory control. So the smokers that were trained to kind of be more cautious definitely got better. They were more accurate at the task. But no, it didn't help people to stay off cigarettes. So there was no difference in the number of cigarettes they smoked, no clear pattern of results in terms of time to next cigarette, and no effect on their preference for tobacco. Okay, so 2009 kind of marked the point where my research kind of switched, not switched direction completely, but it was a turning point, because it was here that I started to focus on electronic cigarettes. I was on clearing duty in the big room, you know, first couple of days, loads of people, lots going on. And a colleague had said to me, I was talking about my smoking research, as I do, and a colleague said, oh, you know, have you heard about e-cigarettes? And no, I hadn't heard about e-cigarettes. And he explained them, described them, and I thought, well, wow, these do sound really good. Smokers find it so hard to stop smoking, even with nicotine replacement therapy. Maybe e-cigarettes are going to be the thing, because they deliver nicotine and they're also replacing some of the actions of smoking as well. And smokers report missing that when they quit. So I did at this time have really strong hopes. I was really excited about this. And I thought, you know, these are going to be amazing. These are going to really help people to quit smoking. So I Googled them straight away, and the one company in the UK at the time was the Electronic Cigarette Company. So I got onto them, told them what I was doing, said, you know, I'm really interested in doing some research around e-cigarettes, and they were quite keen. They were on board with it. So I began to do some work with them, and they later became totally wicked. So we did a couple of things in those early days. This was in around 2009, 2010. E-cigarettes had only been on the market for a couple of years. There was hardly any publications. There were about 2 papers published. So we did a survey and we did a lab study. We actually did the lab study first, but I'm going to talk about the survey first. It wasn't really known why people were using e-cigarettes, how they were using them, who was using them. So we tried to capture some of this information in a very early study, which Totally Wicked helped us with. So we recruited just over 1,000 e-cigarette users and just asked them a whole load of different questions. And most people reported that they were using e-cigarette to quit smoking, and that most of them had actually been successful at quitting smoking. And at the time, there were not any really particularly amazing e-cigarettes on the market. There were basically these or these. And these ones were reported to be the most popular amongst our survey users, but quite a few people also reported that they were using these cigarette-like types of e-cigarettes. And actually that was quite important for people, to have something that looked like a cigarette. People were using quite high nicotine concentrations at that time. So 82% said they were using at least 18 milligrams per milliliter, so that's 1.8% if you understand it like that better. And preferred flavours were tobacco and fruit. So that just captured some of the kind of reasons why people were using them. So this was really one of the first studies we did, and hardly anything was known about e-cigarettes at the time. And so the first thing we thought we would look at is, well, if e-cigarettes are going to be useful for people to quit smoking, then they really need to address cravings and withdrawal symptoms. So these people commonly report that they relapse because they've got strong cravings or experience of withdrawal symptoms, among other factors. So we had a look at this to see whether e-cigarettes could reduce craving and withdrawal symptoms. And we used this really early e-cigarette. It's called the Super White, which just sounds like a tampon to me, but that's what it was called, and it's not around anymore, not surprisingly. So we got smokers into the lab again. We asked them not to smoke for 10 to 12 hours again. We can make a habit of this. And we had one group that used the nicotine-containing cigarette-like e-cigarette, and one group had an e-cigarette that didn't contain any nicotine at all. This was also what I loved about e-cigarettes when I became aware of them, because you've got a placebo. You can get e-cigarettes without any nicotine, so you've got a natural placebo there. So they came in, they hadn't smoked, we gave them either a nicotine-containing e-cigarette, a non-nicotine-containing e-cigarette, and some poor people were just given an e-cigarette to hold and not use, just to kind of control for that having something in their hand. And they rated their craving before they used, 5 minutes after, and 20 minutes after. And this is what we found. So the red bars are when they were abstinent, orange is 5 minutes after using, and yellow is 20 minutes after using. So you can see the people that were just given it to hold, weren't very happy. Their craving is still pretty high. The highest this goes is 7 on this scale, so they're craving quite a lot. But people that had the nicotine or the placebo one had a reduction in craving, to kind of the same extent really. Not a massive reduction, it was statistically significant, but only about 1 point on the scale. Wasn't as amazing as I thought it would be. We now know that these e-cigarette devices really don't deliver nicotine very well anyway. But what this did show, that even just having an e-cigarette and being able to puff on it, even if it doesn't contain nicotine, at least in the early days of abstinence, could reduce craving a little bit. So that got us interested a little bit more in cues and visual appearance of e-cigarettes and how important that is. Now, at around this time, we were starting to become aware, there was more evidence accumulating that suggests that the tank-style models, the kind of pen-like models, were actually more effective, better at delivering nicotine than these kind of cigarette-like ones. But a lot of people were still using the ones that looked like cigarettes. So we explored this a little bit further in a couple of studies. So, Catherine, this is your undergraduate research project with Yazzo. Part of it, anyway. So Catherine and Yazzo were interested in seeing which e-cigarette people would choose when they were presented with two, one that looks like a cigarette, and this is a kind of a tank model, it looks a bit like a mascara or a pen. And then they said, which one would you use if you wanted to try and quit smoking, and why? And it was about 50-50. But what was more interesting is that the people that chose the one that looked like a cigarette said that is why they'd chosen it. They wanted something that looked like a cigarette. I mean, we knew it wasn't as good, but they were what people were choosing. So we then did another study with another couple of undergraduate students at UEL to explore how important is that visual appearance. And if we give them an e-cigarette that looks like a cigarette but it's red, is that just as good at reducing craving? And it turns out, no, it wasn't. That to reduce their craving, it was much more important for it to actually look like a cigarette and to be the same colour. So this is their craving score before they'd used it, and then after they've used it. And you can see for the white one, their craving is reducing, but for the red one, it didn't. So cues did seem to be important, at least during those kind of early stages of abstinence. I'm just going to kind of take a little bit of a departure now to set the scene in terms of what was happening with regulation. And this was quite important, not just for smokers and vapers, but for the direction of my research as well. When e-cigarettes came onto the market, and for the next 5 years or so, people were pretty baffled. They were like, how do we regulate these? Well, are they drug delivery devices? Are they medicines? Are they tobacco products? Maybe they're consumer products? What do we do with this new category? It really did take the world by surprise. And in 2009, the FDA instructed the US Customs and Border Protection to seize a shipment of e-cigarettes that had just arrived into the US. And the FDA claimed these are illegal drug delivery devices. Now, the e-cigarette companies involved actually took the FDA to court and claimed, no, these are not drug delivery devices. These e-cigarettes are tobacco products, so the FDA has no regulation over these. And they actually won in the court of law. And the court told the FDA that it had no jurisdiction to regulate e-cigarettes as drug delivery devices, and it could only regulate them as tobacco products. So in 2011, the FDA decided and announced that it would regulate e-cigarettes in the same way that it regulates tobacco and cigarettes and other tobacco products. So it deemed e-cigarettes to be tobacco products. Now, something different was happening in the UK. In 2010, the Medicines Healthcare Regulatory Agency put out a consultation outlining its rationale to regulate e-cigarettes as medicines. Now, that actually did go through, and that was approved by the government, but at around the same time, in Europe, the Tobacco Products Directive was due to be updated. This was around 2013, and the decision there was to push e-cigarettes into this new Tobacco Products Directive, and this went through. So we've got this situation where in the US, e-cigarettes are regulated as tobacco products. In the UK, they are licensed as medicines, but this was overruled kind of by the EU, so they're also regulated as consumer products. And in fact, it's so bureaucratic and costly to go through the medicines licensing in the UK that no e-cigarettes have gone through that process and become licensed as a medicine. But we do have that dual route for licensing in the UK. And then in Europe, e-cigarettes are licensed as consumer products. So this was relevant for me at the time. Not only was I feeding into all of these consultations and trying to steer regulation in what I thought was the right direction, but it also meant that my desire at the time to run a trial, what I really wanted to do, was to run a randomised controlled trial to see if e-cigarettes were effective at helping people to stop smoking. I applied to the European Research Council. They wanted nothing to do with it, didn't think e-cigarettes were safe. I was working with a couple of tobacco companies. Sorry, not tobacco companies, never done that. I was working with a couple of e-cigarette companies, but they were involved in this FDA lawsuit. And we were going to do a randomised controlled trial, but they were trying to argue that e-cigarettes are tobacco products, so didn't want anything to do with the trial that might label them as medicines. So no trials were going on at that point. So I carried on doing some other work on e-cigarettes. We got some funding from what was known as SkyCigs at the time to look at blood nicotine delivery from e-cigarettes, because again, if e-cigarettes are going to be effective at helping people to stop smoking, they do need to be able to deliver nicotine. So we got 14 regular e-cigarette users who were all using this SkyCig product to come into the lab. They hadn't vaped again, they hadn't vaped overnight, and we asked them to puff in the lab on their e-cigarettes, all using the SkyCig e-cigarette, and we took lots of measures, including blood. Now, we decided to ask them all to have a standard 10 puffs, 3-second puff, 30-second interval, and another 3-second puff. Okay? And then after that, we said just use it as much or as little as you want. And you can see the results here. So this is the amount of nicotine in the blood on the vertical axis. And you can see that, yeah, it does go up, but it takes quite a lot of puffing. It doesn't peak up until about 60 minutes, and this is where they stopped. So we're seeing, yeah, a bit of an increase in blood nicotine levels. But, I mean, we didn't test smokers, but if you were to plot what it would look like if you'd had a cigarette, wrong button, it would look more like this. So when you smoke a cigarette, you get a really rapid uptake of nicotine, very, very quick, and it would look more like that blue line there. So really, with this particular e-cigarette, it's not delivering particularly high amounts of nicotine, though it is comparable to what you see with nicotine replacement therapy, gum and lozenges and so on. So that was interesting, but what was even more interesting is when we looked at the individual data from these 14 participants. There was huge variation. These people were all using the same device, the same nicotine strength, the same flavour, and even for the 10 standard puffs, you can see that the blood nicotine levels are really quite different, even at that point. When they start vaping as much or as little as they want, they spread out even more. So we've got one person who's getting hardly any nicotine. Other people are getting really quite high amounts. So this was really interesting because we thought, well, it suggests that people can actually vape on an e-cigarette in lots of different ways and get the level of nicotine that's useful for them. We've already known from the smoking literature that smokers are able to get as much or as little nicotine as they want from a tobacco cigarette by just changing the way they puff. And this showed that actually this seems to be the case in vapers as well. So like smokers, vapers seem to have this, well, experienced vapers anyway, these were experienced vapers, have what we call this fingertip control over the amount of nicotine that they can get into their blood. So just coming back to regulation. So e-cigarettes were regulated under the EU Tobacco Products Directive, the TPD, and within this directive there were lots and lots of regulations, and it came into effect in 2016. So there were regulations about the size of the liquid refill bottles, about the size of the tanks, ingredients lists, warning labels, and importantly the amount of nicotine that you could have in the e-liquid. So prior to this, there was no upper limit on the amount of nicotine that you could have in e-liquid. But with the new Tobacco Products Directive, the upper limit was set at 20 milligrams of nicotine per millilitre of liquid, or 2%. So we knew that at this time there were quite a few people, quite a few vapers that were using above this level. And we, amongst other researchers, were wondering, well, what would happen when this new directive comes in and higher levels become illegal? People have to switch down to using lower levels. So we tested this out. We got 11 experienced vapers again to come to our lab, and we got them to use this e-cigarette. You can see over time e-cigarettes were getting bigger and bulkier and more fancy. This one was good because it had an inbuilt puff counter, so it could tell us exactly how many puffs people had had, when they'd had the puff, how long the puff was. So they used that e-cigarette, they practiced with it a bit first, and they came on 2 occasions. So on one occasion, we gave them a low level of nicotine, and on the other occasion, they had a high level, which was above the cut-off of this new regulation. And these were all people who were used to vaping the high levels of nicotine. So we measured their puffing patterns using this device, and we looked at their nicotine delivery. So these are the puffing patterns. These are the averages across the 11 participants. And the blue is when they're using the high nicotine strength, and the red is when they're using the low nicotine strength. So in terms of the average number of puffs they took over an hour of vaping in the lab, you can see that when they used the low nicotine, they took a lot more puffs. And in how long each puff was, so this is the average duration of each puff, this was again much higher when they had used the low nicotine concentration. And that resulted in them consuming twice as much e-liquid. So when given the low nicotine concentration, the vapors in the study, they puffed more, each puff was longer, and they consumed double the amount of e-liquid. What happens to their blood nicotine delivery? So they're clearly compensating by changing the way they puff, but are they able to get the same nicotine level? Well, we chose quite a big difference between the high and low here, so the answer is no, they couldn't. So this was the levels that they were getting with the high nicotine. This is now starting to approximate what smokers can achieve through tobacco smoking. Could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. But when they're using the much lower nicotine, even though they're trying to compensate for that and puff more, they can't get those nicotine levels up as high as when they're using a high level. We then decided to take this outside of the lab. It's a bit artificial just having people in the lab for an hour. So we took it outside of the lab and we tested people over a longer period of time. So again, we had 20 e-cigarette users. They used, our device with the puff counter, and they were given either a high nicotine concentration liquid or a low nicotine concentration liquid. And on some occasions, they were allowed to adjust the power. On other occasions, they weren't allowed to. Now, this was because as time was going on, e-cigarettes were getting more and more sophisticated, and as the high levels of nicotine disappeared off the market, e-cigarettes kind of compensated, and they started allowing you to adjust the power. So you could increase the power to try and improve the amount of nicotine that you got. So people would take the e-cigarette away, and they'd use either the high or the low with adjustable power or fixed power for 1 week. Then they'd come back and we'd record the puffing information, we'd take some questionnaire measures, and we also took some urine samples so we could measure harmful chemicals in the urine. And then they were given the next e-cigarette. So the low or the high with fixed or adjustable, and so on. So they did each of these 4 conditions over 4 consecutive weeks. So varying the power and varying the low and the high nicotine concentration. And what did we find? Well, first of all, when we looked at the puffing patterns, we found the same results that we'd found in the lab. So when they were given the lower nicotine concentration, they took more puffs and they took longer puffs. And this was even more so when the power was fixed, when they couldn't adjust it.
In terms of their self-reported effects, we asked them how strong their craving was and whether they were satisfied with the device they'd had that week. And their craving was higher and their satisfaction was lower when they'd had the lower nicotine strength. When they were allowed to change the power, they generally increased the power in all conditions, but they did this to a much greater extent when they had the lower nicotine concentration. And then we also found higher levels of formate. So this is a breakdown product of formaldehyde, which is a carcinogenic compound in humans. And this was much higher in the condition when they'd had the low nicotine and when they were able to adjust the power. So overall, when they were given lower nicotine, they puff more, they tried to compensate, puff more, take longer puffs, it's not as satisfying, so they whack the power up, and that increases exposure to formaldehyde. We then teamed up with a few other researchers. A colleague in Poland said, well, you know, what we could do is we could actually mimic those puffing patterns and use our vaping machine to look at some carbonyl compounds, some other kind of potentially harmful compounds in the e-cigarette vapor. So based on those two studies, we looked at the puffing patterns for people when they were using the high strength and the low strength, and we programmed this vaping machine to mimic those puffing patterns. We could then capture the vapor and measure a number of different harmful chemicals in that vapor. And this was the findings from the first study. And these are carbonyl compounds, so compounds that we know can be harmful to humans. And the red is showing, these are based on the puffing patterns of our participants when they were using the low nicotine strength compared to blue, the high nicotine strength. And exposure to these chemicals was increased when they were puffing using the lower nicotine e-liquid. In the second study, we went a little bit further. We were funded by Cancer Research UK, and they were interested in knowing, well, what's the relevance to cancer? And our simulation suggested that when you switch from high to low nicotine strength, there's a 1.7 to around a 2-fold increase in cancer risk. Now, this is still much, much lower than from tobacco smoking, but obviously we want e-cigarettes to be as safe as they possibly can be, which suggests that maybe using a higher strength might be better. So that was a press release that we put out, basically. Based on this program of research, we tried to get this, what seems like quite a counterintuitive message, really, that the higher strength liquid might be better, because if you're using a lower strength, you seem to puff more, you consume more e-liquid, it's not as satisfying, it doesn't reduce your craving as much, and it possibly increases exposure to cancer-causing toxins as well. Now, this press release was picked up by a lot of media outlets, including The Sun in press, and for once the Sun actually got something right and accurately captured our findings there. And yeah, there's the message. It may be safer to use lower nicotine e-liquids. At around this time, the House of Commons, also their select committee, were conducting an inquiry into e-cigarettes and e-cigarette regulation. So it was quite pertinent, I think, to submit written evidence based on the results from these studies around nicotine concentrations in e-liquids. So with Sharon and Catherine, we submitted written evidence, and then I was invited to go and present oral evidence at the House of Commons in 2018. And yep, they talked about nicotine concentrations quite a lot in their summary report, and it was followed by a commitment from the government to review this cap on nicotine concentrations in e-liquids. Now, obviously that hasn't happened. They said they'd look into it, and I'm still waiting. Going back to the regulations. So I've already spoken a bit about the nicotine limits on the e-liquid. But the other thing that was introduced with the Tobacco Products Directive was mandatory warning labels on e-cigarette packs. So either this product contains nicotine, which is a highly addictive substance, or this one, which is the same but slightly longer, it's not recommended for non-smokers. I wasn't really happy with these warning labels. They look very much like the old warning labels that used to be on cigarette packs before the awful graphic pictorial warning labels. And the concern here is that it really might scare smokers off from using this product, which we know is much less harmful than smoking. Many adults already, and still do, think that e-cigarettes are just as harmful as smoking. There's a lot of evidence to suggest they are not. They are nowhere near as harmful as smoking. So really, we want smokers to use e-cigarettes because there's a good chance it will help them quit. And many people also think that nicotine is harmful. Nicotine is addictive, but it's not the component of smoking that causes cancer and other cardiovascular disease and other problems. So maybe there's something more we can do with these warning labels. So we teamed up with a lot of experts to try and make some kind of better warning labels that would send that message to smokers that these are much less harmful than smoking, but also send the message that these are designed to help you stop smoking, but we also didn't want to encourage non-smokers. So quite hard to kind of get an effective message there. But we came up with about 20, and we did some testing around which ones were best, and then we compared these to the current Tobacco Products Directive warning, the nicotine addiction warning. So in the first study, this was a student project by Rida Ahmed, and we did an online study with 95 smokers, and they either viewed the Tobacco Products Directive nicotine addiction message, or they viewed a message that referred to e-cigarettes as being 95% safer, or they saw no message at all. And they rated their willingness to use, the likelihood that they would purchase an e-cigarette, and their intention to use as a quit attempt. Before and after, they viewed one of those three messages. And I've just presented the results for willingness to use, but we saw very similar patterns for purchasing and intentions as well. So here we've got in blue the ratings before they saw the message, and in red the ratings after they saw the message. And this is the Tobacco Products Directive addiction warning. And we can see that their willingness to use reduced after they saw that this product contains nicotine, a highly addictive substance. On the other hand, if they saw that this product is 95% safer than smoking, their willingness to use increased. And if they saw no message, didn't make any difference. Then we received some funding from Cancer Research UK to look at this in a bit more detail. And this included a much larger sample of smokers, but also non-smokers as well, because it is quite important that we're not putting messages out there that is going to entice non-smokers to use these products. And this time we displayed the messages on different packs, so people would see them as they would usually encounter them on the packs themselves. So this is an example of the reduced risk message that we used. This use of this product is much less harmful than smoking, so that was the one that did the best in our pilot study. And so they saw these messages on lots of different e-cigarette packs, but they either saw this reduced risk message or the Tobacco Products Directive nicotine addiction message, no message at all, or both of the messages together. And we found that if they'd seen the reduced risk message, their perceptions of addictiveness were lower. Their perceptions of how harmful the product was lower, but in smokers only. We didn't see that in non-smokers. And their interest in purchasing or using the product increased in smokers, but not in non-smokers. So, I mean, we couldn't have asked for better with this study, really, because this does suggest that a reduced risk message like this may well help to encourage smokers to use, but without resulting in any increased uptake amongst non-smokers. Coming to the end now, so I said a few slides back that what I really wanted to do was a trial of e-cigarettes. Can they help smokers to stop smoking? And I wasn't really very successful in those early days. And then in around 2014, colleagues from Queen Mary, Hayden McRobbie and Peter Hayek, invited me to be a co-investigator on an application to the NIHR for funding to do a big trial comparing e-cigarettes versus nicotine replacement therapy when they're delivered within the Stop Smoking service. We were awarded the funding for this, and it was a long study. We started in 2015. We finished the follow-ups in 2018. And these were smokers who were accessing the Stop Smoking service, and they were randomized to either what usual care was, which is a choice of nicotine replacement therapy products. They could choose one or two, or they were given an e-cigarette starter kit. And they were all offered weekly behavioral support alongside this and followed up to 1 year. And here are the results. So at 1 year, we saw almost twice as many people had quit if they'd used an e-cigarette compared to if they'd used nicotine replacement therapy. So we're finally kind of getting that evidence building up to show that e-cigarettes can help people to stop smoking. Now, because this was delivered within the Stop Smoking service, these are generally people who are quite motivated to quit anyway. So what happens with the rest of the population? We know that smoking prevalence, we're doing pretty well in the UK. Smoking prevalence is gradually coming down. But for some parts of society, those who are most disadvantaged and most deprived, people with mental health conditions, other addictions, those smoking rates are still very, very high and not really showing any signs of declining. Then Sharon Cox and I were discussing this in around 2017, I think it was, and how some sectors of society might really benefit from an e-cigarette, particularly smokers who are experiencing homelessness, because around 70 to 90% of people who experience homelessness smoke, but can't really afford to fork out and to get an e-cigarette starter kit, especially if they don't think it's going to work. So we were interested in trying to take e-cigarettes to some of the most disadvantaged in society. And actually we thought, well, if we provide the starter kit at a place where they're already accessing other services, that might make it much easier to get them started on reducing and hopefully quitting. So we were funded to do a feasibility study. This is just a small study to check that actually this might work before we run a bigger trial. And we just included 4 centres in England and Scotland just to check that people were interested. Could the staff at homeless centres support the study? Would people come back after 6 months and tell us how they got on? And were there any other unintended consequences of giving people e-cigarettes? And that all went very well. We did find that people came back. People were quite accepting of being allocated to an e-cigarette condition or to usual care. So that allowed us then to put in funding for a much larger study. And this now brings us completely up to date. We've just received a big grant from the NIHR, and we started this project in October 2020 to test the offer of an e-cigarette starter kit to smokers accessing homeless services compared to usual care. And we're partnering with 8 universities across the UK and 32 homeless centres. Few other projects that are still ongoing. Many people buy e-cigarettes online, and they don't have the kind of help and support that you might have through a vape shop. So we're looking at what other kind of tailored advice we might need to give people about which nicotine strength to use or which device to use. And we've also seen e-cigarettes change a lot in recent years. They went really, really big for a while, and then they went small again. So we now have these new pod-based devices on the market, which started with Juul. So we're also just coming to the end of that project, comparing 2 different versions of the Juul. And finally, another ongoing project relates to looking at what happens when smokers use e-cigarettes. There's quite a lot of concern that they don't quit completely and they continue to smoke, and that could be a problem because they're using more nicotine. But it may take time to switch. So in the Traject project with colleagues at UEA, we're looking at those patterns of use over a long period of time, and that's switching from smoking to vaping. And just to show that I don't just like sticking needles in other people, I am quite willing for my colleagues to also stick needles into me. So that's it from me. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble on. And thank you to all my funders and all my lovely colleagues. These are all people I've worked with or published with. Sorry if you didn't make the cut. No, I'm sorry if I've forgotten anyone. And also there are many students that I've worked with over the years who I couldn't get hold of them or find their photos to put on there. So, but there's a few people there. So, thank you. Do you want me to stand up or sit down?
Stand up. She has to stand up, so she has to be the centre of attention, of course, and not sit down, even though she's earned that
Just
rest.
for today.
Just for today, exactly. So, first of all, before I get on to thanking you enormously for your lecture, you gave us some tips not just about smoking and other addictions. That's quite useful for us. So, Dave, our Vice Chancellor, Tara, our Provost, Nicole, our Chief Customer Care Officer, we always wax about how do we get people to come to clearing to recruit more students. We've tried everything, haven't we? And we're still trying to get more people to attend. Look at all the guilty faces in the audience. Oh my God, he's talking about me. And you've provided the solution. Come to clearing. So take note of this draft. Come to clearing, and you might end up doing very well funded, world-leading research that will make you very famous. Okay? This is a woman of enormous talents, not just in addiction. Though you shipped the tackle, if I may use a footballing metaphor, Lynne, because you didn't tell us what that picture from When Harry Met Sally was actually representing for those of us who may not have seen it, Liar. Okay? So your
Maybe
courage...
over drinks later.
Yeah.
Maybe over drinks later. So for those of you who have not watched When Harry Met Sally or that actual scene, okay, I'm saying no more. So, what Lynne has shown tonight and throughout her career is the enormous advantages of building a really good programme of work. Not only is this programme really important, because despite this fantastic work, smoking cigarettes still remains an important public health problem, not just in the UK, but in other parts of the world. So anything that generates quality evidence, and high quality evidence in your case, in your colleague's case, is to be welcomed. Because even though, and I was looking at the data again earlier this week in preparation for tonight, when you think about the original work of Dahl and Peto in the 50s that truly transformed our approach to understanding the implications for cigarette smoking in health, not just in making us ill, but in killing a great many people. When Dahl and Peto started that work, 86% of the population of the UK was smoking cigarettes. We've tried lots of things, the engineering, the empowerment, the education approach, and as Lynne said, gradually, so in 2020, 28% of the UK population are smoking cigarettes. Now, that's a huge decrease over that period of time, and it's to be welcomed and congratulated. But it's still too high, of course. And Lynne and her colleagues and others have contributed enormously to the reductions, significant reductions in people smoking cigarettes over the years. And we should pause for a moment to think about that. That's no mean feat. That saved millions of lives and will continue to do so. But not only saving lives, but also improving the quality of people's lives. As I often say, not just the years in their life, but the life in their years. And it's still not too late if you're a smoker to stop smoking. Yeah? To add years and quality to your life, of course. So, a long programme of work, well funded by some of the most prestigious funders. And it's not everyone who gets a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine, the third highest ranked journal in the world. Okay? So it's a bit more than Q1, as we often say. So that's quite an achievement. And it's come from a curiosity. Asking herself questions, looking at something, thinking, wonder why that is. And then not only just Googling the answer, but deciding to systematically study this, as we've seen tonight. And this is just a section of the work that Lynne has done. So it's tremendously important work. And it will be tremendously important going forward. As I've said to Lynne on many occasions and to other colleagues, this is truly world-breaking, world-leading research. And it has the potential to be even more important, as if it's not important enough already. And that gives brilliant credit to you and your colleagues who have done this work. So appreciate that, and the people in the audience who are your colleagues who have done this work with you, well done you. It's brought enormous reputation enhancement to London South Bank University. So well done for that. And as a, former Dean of the School of Applied Sciences, so a Dean of Applied Sciences on secondment to another role for a couple of years. As that Dean, I was enormously proud, as were your colleagues in the Division of Psychology and in the school, that you were among us doing this work. We loved it, of course, and we loved you, not just for the work that you do, but you're such a woman of fantastic personal qualities, and I've experienced them at close quarters, as have lots of people in this audience. A truly inspirational researcher, a truly inspiring woman, of course, and with everything else going on in your life, even more inspiring, of course. So I personally, and I think the university, and I think quietly we are enormously proud that you're with us, and enormously proud, and privileged, if I may say, to know you and know you well, as are your colleagues. So, as Madam Provost, I like to call the lovely Tara, and said at the beginning, this is a really important work, an inaugural lecture, and most of us who are professors in the audience have done them or will do them. I remember mine at Nottingham University about 15 years ago. Are special occasions because they mark the person achieving the highest academic rank. And that's no mean achievement. And so it's right that we celebrate those achievements formally, like tonight. And so thank you all, of course, for coming to listen to this. But you know, you're lucky to be in this audience listening to this, frankly, if I may say so, as we all are. But our thanks are reserved enormously, and I've only got 20 minutes left, so don't worry. But I'm mindful I'm the person standing between you and some dinner. But an enormous thank you to Lynne for taking the time to deliver and share with us your research and show us, if we didn't already know, what a truly remarkable woman and researcher you are. And to confirm the pride we have in you at LSBU being here. So a small token of our thanks to mark the occasion, and again my warmest congratulations for this occasion for you tonight.